Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Richard Ferrer, the editor of the Jewish News, and it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Jewish News panel in association with René Cassin. Our debate tonight is entitled Chilling Echoes, the Plight of the Uyghurs and Why We Must Act Now. We've seen dreadful images and read some heartbreaking testimony about the plight of millions of Uyghur Muslims in China's northwestern Xinjiang region. Persecuted and imprisoned, many are being held in what the Chinese euphemistically call education and training camps, a more accurate term for these buildings encircled by razor wire and guard towers is concentration camps. Have emerged in recent weeks that have sickened the civilized world. A 12-ton shipment of Uyghur hair due to be sold as wigs, and drone footage of hundreds, if not thousands, of Uyghur men bound and blindfolded being led onto trains. So what can be done, and what, as we individuals, what can we do? Well, I'm proud to say that we have here this evening a stellar panel to discuss just that. Mia Hasenson-Gross is Executive Director of Jewish human rights organization René Cassin. She has taken a leading role in bringing the Uyghurs' plight to light here in the UK. Oliva Marks-Woldman is the Chief Executive of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. The theme for Holocaust Memorial Day in 2021 is going to be the light in the darkness, deeply pertinent to tonight's conversation. I am delighted at the 11th hour that we've been joined by Conservative MP Nusrat Ghani, stepping in at the very last moment for Lib Dem MP Alistair Carmichael. She's used her platform widely to advocate for the Uyghurs in the media. In fact, she was doing a breakfast TV programme only this morning on this very subject. She's co-authored a column in Politics Home website today, warning how Uyghur slave labour is being used to produce items that end up on our high streets. So we'll be talking to her more about that. And I'm not sure if he's with us now, but if he isn't, he will be very shortly. Author and broadcaster Maajid Nawaz, who has just come off a hunger strike to draw attention to the Uyghurs' plight. He's also championing a petition to impose sanctions on China and calling for a parliamentary debate to be held. I'm pleased to say that it's now got, when I last looked, 130,000 signatures. You'll find that petition at petition.parliament.uk. I do urge you to sign it too. All four of these people have been prime movers in raising awareness of the Uyghurs' plight. But before we hear from them, I'd like to introduce Rahima Mahmut, a London-based Uyghur human rights activist. Her family is among the hundreds, if not thousands, whose fate is currently unknown in Xinjiang. Rahima has not been home for 20 years, and since the height of the China crackdown in 2017, she's lost contact with her family, and that includes 9 siblings. Rahima, thank you for being with us this evening. Can I ask you to frame our conversation? Could you give us a sense of your family's story and update us on the current situation in Xinjiang?
Thank you very much for organizing this and giving me the platform to talk about my people. I come from a very religious family. Not all Uyghurs are religious, but my family, we are very religious from my father's side, and my mother, they are musicians. So very kind of a mixed. My experience when I was living in my country, primary school, we felt at that time that, hardly can see any Chinese people in villages, for example. That is my experience. And then in the 80s, I moved to city, and so the city life, then I started seeing more Han Chinese, and my parents didn't speak any Chinese at all. At that time, the Chinese people, most of them, we call them the old Chinese, they had to speak Uyghur because they find it very difficult not, to get on with their everyday life if they didn't learn the language. Then after my university years, situation has changed dramatically. So when I graduated from university in 1992, petrochemical engineering, one of the top universities, and I thought I will find my dream job. And then I couldn't find a job in the capital. In the end, I had to go to a place where I was assigned to work in a petrochemical industrial town of my town. And only started working there, my experience looking for a job, and ended up in this plant, one of the biggest ethylene plants, 3,500 employees, about 350 or Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities, so basically 10%. But the population of that town, around 55-60% were Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. So I would say the root cause of the conflicts or any kind of dissatisfaction or problems is always because of the inequality, and we Uyghurs became strangers in our own homeland. Because from 1949, when CCP took power in East Turkestan, the population was 4 to 5%, and then now the population is almost 50%. And the mass migration and marginalizing the Uyghurs, the local people, taking away jobs, all sorts of discrimination, that led a lot of protests and then crackdowns. After crackdown, then they claim the people being extremists, or later after 9/11, suddenly China declared that they also face Islamic terrorists, and then situation just changed dramatically, and from 2014, I would say, so the persecution actually became more kind of genocidal policies. So the new governor in 2016, a guy called Chen Quanguo, who became the governor of East Turkestan, prior to becoming appointed to East Turkestan, he was in Tibet. During his rule, over hundreds of Tibetans self-immolated because of the extreme harsh rule under him. So then in 2016, he was appointed by Beijing, and so the level of oppression increased to another level. And so I will say that is the start of the genocidal policies they have implemented. And 2017, from April, they started, mass arrest started, just rounding up people. Suddenly, the police would just raid into houses, place black hood over the head, handcuff them, take them away. So I last contacted my brother was in January 2017. That is time my brother said, "Leave us in God's hand." And I know that is a time actually something was changing, something terrifying is about to happen.
Your brother 3 years ago, you've lost contact with your family since. You must have some sort of contact or avenue of communication. Can you give us a sense of what's been happening in those subsequent 3 years and what your fears and concerns might be?
Well, I never called anyone since that warning, because I know my brother wouldn't say. That's indirectly telling me not to contact. Later, through my translation work and some reports, I learned that anyone who answered foreign calls, within 5-10 minutes, police would arrive the house. Because the phone, all the Uyghur people's their phone, landline, both landline and their cell phones is connected there through their ID is connected to the Public Security Bureau. So any suspicious call that alert the police immediately, and then they come take them away. And for that reason, I couldn't really risk anyone. And also this voice recognition. They have recorded all the voices of the dissidents, like myself. So if I call anyone, even Chinese, that as soon as my voice, when they hear the voice, that alert the police straight away. Don't forget, now my country is ruled. One is by very sophisticated surveillance, high tech. And then, human power.
Question before I throw it over to the rest of our panel. When you hear things like the UK ambassador, the Chinese UK ambassador on the Andrew Marr show last weekend, literally denying the information and the images that he is seeing before him, how does that make you feel emotionally when you see what's going on? And how do we break down that wall of misinformation? What can individual people do in the face of that stubbornness and intransigence on the part of the Chinese government? Well,
thank you. This is a very good question. Chinese government, the CCP, the rule is based, they rule the country with lies, complete lies, the propaganda, everything is lying. And I experienced this in 1989 when I was one of the many thousands of students in Tiananmen Square. I was one of the participants of the Tiananmen student movement. I left the square on the 2nd of June. And then my university was in Dalian, 21 hours train journey from Beijing. And so after arriving Dalian on the 3rd of June, then the 4th, we learned this massacre happened. And we were warned when we were in the square that the military is already, standstill outskirts of Beijing. So we were repeatedly warned that you must leave. So we left. And on the 4th, we know mass murder happened. Then in that evening, on the 4th of June, that evening, all the university students were summoned, were forced to go to all the lecture halls. On this TV screen, we were shown how so-called rioters attacking the tanks, attacking the military, burning the police and the military personnel. And we couldn't understand how they made up all that kind of scenes. And then that played 24/7 for the next many months about this very peaceful protest. So I'm not surprised because I lived in that system. Every time when they cracked down in, the peaceful protest in Roja, which led, for me to make decision to leave in 1997, February 5th, Gulja massacre was exactly the same. So something happened very peacefully, and then after crackdown, when you watch the television, completely lie after lie, lie after lie. So from the very first time, even in 2018 in August, I remember it was around the 12th or 13th of August, the UN very first time said we acknowledge there are up to 1 million Uyghur and other Muslims are interned in these camps. China just denied it. They said, no, there is no such thing. Only 2 weeks later, when they were presented all these satellite images and many research reports, and they said it's vocational camps. So I'm not surprised. I didn't expect he would say, he would, tell the truth.
It's deeply important and powerful to hear your words. Thank you for framing our conversation this evening, and I look forward to coming back to you very shortly. I would like to bring Mia in from René Cassin, our partner on this evening's conversation. Your organisation published a report at the beginning of the year that outlined some horrific details of rape, forced abortion, sterilisation, all sorts of humiliations. Could you give us a sense of how René Cassin has become involved with the Uyghur cause and your work with Rahima?
Yes, thank you, Richard. Actually, our work started already in May 2019, where I met Rahima and heard her story. And then as a Jewish human rights organization that works to promote human rights based on our Jewish values and Jewish experience, the resonance with the Jewish experience of the Holocaust and the emergent legacy, the human rights framework that came from it, meant that we had to work with Rahima to raise awareness into what's happening, because no one else was. This wasn't in the media. And we felt that the Jewish community, the Jewish people, we are speakers by experience. We know what it is to be persecuted for our ethnicity, for our religion, cultural genocide that led to physical genocide. So we have this, we believe that we had the responsibility for mobilizing the Jewish community because of the moral responsibility, the moral authority and the moral responsibility we have to stand out for what's happening to the Uyghurs. So it started by literally raising awareness and bringing Rahima and her personal story, and then shining a light on what's Jewish about it. Today, one of the challenges we have today is that I think coverage of what's happening to the Uyghurs is insufficient. But there's also, it's still not genocide. It's not a Holocaust. It doesn't have to be a Holocaust. It doesn't have to be a genocide for us to act. And actually, if you think about the beginning of the concept of genocide, it started when Raphael Lemkin, a Jewish human rights lawyer, coined the concept of legacy. It started with cultural genocide. Sorry, when he coined the phrase genocide, it started with cultural genocide, when the writings, the practices, the way of living of a people were being destructed. And only then, when it leads to, does it lead to physical destruction. For various political reasons, the Nuremberg trials and then the 1948 Convention for Elimination of Genocide only looked at the end phase of physical destruction. Are we going to wait for that? Just because international law doesn't recognize it as genocide, because it legally doesn't qualify, people are being killed. It's going to be too late to reach the point. So for us, it was very much about making sure that that legacy of knowing what's happening and preventing it from happening is championed. And then it's about mobilizing the community. It's about bringing the Jewish voice to what's happening. So if it's shining the light on the plight of Uyghur women and the experiences of Uyghur women, whether it's in the camps or in Xinjiang region as a whole, sterilization, forced marriages, abortion, birth control, separation of children, forced labor, and the fact that the majority of the forecast is that the majority of Uyghur people eventually will be coerced into the Chinese government's forced labor systems. And it was always about making sure that we stand in solidarity with the Uyghurs as well.
Olivia from the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, would you be able to just build on what Mia was saying in terms of the nerve, the raw nerve that Uyghurs plight touches in terms of the Jewish experience, the Uyghurs being, as we've already discussed, ethnically and religiously persecuted, the definition of the UN's Genocide Convention established after the Holocaust to ensure things like this, it's a much used term, never again. It seems to be again and again. Thank you, Richard. You're absolutely right. And at the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, it's something we're so deeply concerned about. On Holocaust Memorial Day, of course, we remember and we mourn the Holocaust and all victims of Nazi persecution, but we also commemorate the genocides that have happened since then in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. And we learn about all these for a purpose. And that purpose is to come together and make a better future. And of course, before a better future, we have to have a better present as well. So to see what is happening to Uyghur Muslims and to see those incremental steps that Rahima talked about, those increasing levels of persecution, of course, have a very chilling resonance for Jewish people, but of course for everybody as well. Everybody who learns anything about the Holocaust learns about those stages that led to the Holocaust. And when we learn about genocides that have happened since then, we see those patterns and those parallels. Mia talked very eloquently about how the term genocide was coined by Raphael Lemkin, and later than that, Professor Gregory Stanton of Genocide Watch has talked of the stages, the 10 stages of genocide, each stage incrementally building on previous stages, but you see many stages sometimes happening at the same time. They're all steps that can lead to genocide. And the 10th stage is denial. But we know that denial can happen even whilst genocide is taking place. And that's one of the reasons why tonight's event is so valuable and so kind of inspiring and so heartwarming for all of us, that we're all here committed to standing in solidarity with Rahima and her fellow Uyghur Muslims, but also committing to do something about it. And those stages that we've seen taking place in Xinjiang are so resonant with the stages that we saw in the lead up to the Holocaust. That dehumanization with hair being shaved off, that re-education that we heard about is chilling. To be re-educated away from your culture and to be trained in a different culture and to forget your own faith and community and culture is very chilling. And then to build on that, as we've seen with those forced sterilizations and forced labor, it's profoundly moving and meaningful for all of us who have a personal connection to the Holocaust, but also to anybody who learns anything about the Holocaust and about genocides that have happened since then. Thank you for joining us. You've been doing a lot in the last days and weeks to turn up the pressure. I know you've been on hunger strike pushing for this parliamentary debate. I'm delighted to see that it's now had over 130,000 signatures. Anyone watching who hasn't signed it, petition.parliament.uk, please do join that number. Could you, I mean, my feeling, Maajid, and I watch what you do and I hear the conversations you have and the broadcasts, and of course you had the sit-in today at the Nike factory in East London. For years, people have been standing outside the embassy, the Chinese embassy in London, supporters of Tibet protesting. The intransigence, the unbending will to public pressure. How can we make this bear? How can we even dent the Chinese government into thinking the right thing, let alone doing it?
Well, thank you for having me, and hello to everybody. I apologize, I had some technical difficulties getting in on the screen on time, but it's good to be here. And it was fantastic to hear Rahima speak, and everybody else up until now as well. I just want to comment a bit about the consequences of not Richard achieving what you said, which is grabbing the world's attention to this problem and making sure that it's stopped. The consequences of not doing so, I believe we're at a crossroads, and the urgency of the action that I've been taking today as well as previously, and forgive me if I'm looking a bit funny, I've just come out and I've been sitting in the sun all day outside the Nike store, so a bit low on energy. But if we don't take this with the urgency that it demands right now, then if you think back to President Obama's red line moment in Syria, when he defined a red line and said it wouldn't be crossed, once it was crossed, chemical weapons were then used in Syria. And the problem then, what happens is you shift the Overton window, you push out the line even further, and the unacceptable then becomes routine and becomes the new normal. Now, when you recognize, as I think we all can, that we're in perhaps some of the most divisive time of our lives, we're polarized and pulling each other apart, and hate has gone up and extremism is continuing to rise across the spectrum, we see what the new normal looks like when we lose our moral compass. Now, out of all of when we talk about the importance of maintaining a moral compass grounded in human rights, which I believe forms the basis for a social contract in a democratic nation, and if that wears away, then you end up with authoritarianism, and we see authoritarianism creeping back all over the world. The epitome of the humanitarian basis of that social contract is the issue. It's epitomized by the issue of genocide. You cannot get any more of a destruction of our red lines than if the new normal includes genocide. Now, part of the problem with our new normal, including and normalizing genocide, is that already the situation we find ourselves in is we're already too late, because all of us, due to the mere fact we live in a globalized economy, have become entrenched and dependent on the fruits of this genocide. That's why I was sitting outside Nike today. Most of the trainers I own are Nike. I didn't wear them today, but I've been buying Nike. I've been buying Adidas. I've been buying all of the brands that are on that list that are complicit with the enslaved labor of the Uyghur Muslims in East Turkestan. We've become, because we haven't been speaking about it, we become so dependent, and our lifestyles depend on the nature of the way we've structured our economy. I fear we've already traveled a long way down the road of normalizing genocide as the new normal. And this is why I tell you it's become so difficult to have this conversation, not because somebody's holding a gun to our heads, but because everybody knows the open secret. Everybody knows that this is almost impossible to pull back from, because we've become so blindly dependent on enslaved labor in China by the Communist Party, so that we can maintain our lifestyles with these, with the access to cheap luxuries as we have. So I think that explains part of the drag. And I'd like to probably just say, the last thing I'd like to say on this is, if we cannot successfully get to grips with what's going on, and I mean morally, if we cannot draw a line here and say never again and mean it with the urgency that it demands, then if we miss this moment, now that these videos are being finally recognized in the mainstream media, if we do not seize this moment to demand the moral high ground, because whatever the mistakes in liberal democracies, we're not willfully engaged in genocide. If we don't seize this moment, we lose the moral high ground, because we become complicit. Because in genocide, there's no neutrality. Either we condemn it, or we're basically profiting off of it, which is what our supply chain dependency is about. So all of our PPE is made there as well by enslaved labor. So if we don't seize the moral high ground now, we lose the moral high ground and we become complicit in it. Then if we lose that moment, the only other way to stop a genocide is World War III. And that's why I'm asking everybody, that cannot be the option. We cannot go into another global war. Therefore, the sooner we act now to maintain our moral high ground, the quicker we can build a global alliance of democratic friends and allies who will stand with those people that are concerned about the human rights situation, and the easier it will be to make the CCP compromise, even in the slightest. But if we cannot build an alliance around the moral authority that an anti-genocide campaign naturally builds, and it will be that campaign that could build that alliance. If we don't build that alliance, then it's the USA standing alone, perhaps with Britain, I don't know, and the People's Republic of China. It is more tempting for the PRC to invade Taiwan and go to war if they only see the USA on the other side. If they see all of the world's liberal democratic nations saying genocide is a red line, we will not accept this, the PRC will be less likely to deliberately instigate war. So I genuinely believe that what we are all here doing in this conversation, and what you saw play out over the course of the last week, and thank you, Rahima, for being so constantly available for interviews, I genuinely believe this is the way to stop war. It's to build an alliance around the moral authority that an anti-genocide campaign naturally demonstrates. That's the way that people will come behind us. If they come behind us, the PRC is less likely to want to go to war.
Nusrat, thank you very much for your patience. I'd like to ask you about this moral authority that Maajid talks about, and the urgency. Is there that appetite in Parliament? Is there space for people like you and Alistair Carmichael to push that urgency? What can you do as a member of Parliament?
Lots of my colleagues across the House have been campaigning on this for many, many years, and sometimes you just need a moment to be able to capture not only the public's imagination, but the media's imagination, and then also find a hook within legislation and process as well. And the urgency is definitely there. And when we had the announcement on the Magnitsky sanctions, it felt like finally we had a hook. It's not as far as we want to go, because we want the UN to investigate and do what we think is right, which is say this is a genocide. But we can talk about the UN and the influence of China. But this was the Magnitsky sanctions were one step in the right direction. So when they were announced, the Uyghur were left off, and that was incredibly crushing. But we've still continued to campaign. The Americans have put on their Magnitsky sanctions 4 officials from the area of Xinjiang, and I want to see our government to do the same. It does a couple of things. Apart from just sanctioning them, it just highlights that we are aware, we recognize, and we accept the dreadful situation that the Uyghur are in, but also helps us open up the conversation about some of the things that Maajid spoke about, the UK-China supply chain to the area of Xinjiang. I disagree with Maajid in the point that I think if we can highlight to these firms exactly where the base products are coming from, and say, look, now that you know, there's no way you can deny that this is coming on the back of slave labor. You just got to go and find somewhere else in China or somewhere else in the world to go and find your base products from. But we can't do that alone in the UK. Americans can't do that by themselves. We need to work with our partner countries. And there are enough of us to try and do this together. There really is. So the Magnitsky sanctions was a moment in the last few weeks, as well as the footage that was then re-emerged and put out again in the media. And I must say, Richard, even though watching the Chinese ambassador on Sunday morning was incredibly difficult to watch, it has helped our argument. It really has helped our argument. So I would encourage the ambassador to do as many shows as he can, because it enables people to understand actually how important this is. What's really awful about the situation is that this is the most modern way of undertaking a genocide. The way technology is used, as Rahima said, tracking voices, facial recognition, every movement is monitored. It also means that content can't get out of Xinjiang. It's so hard for us to get audio, visual content, and that's the way the world works at the moment. But they are oppressing the Uyghur. They are managing any content being sent out from the area. But fundamentally, they're using technology to control and abuse the Uyghur people. Rahima gave a really shocking account of what's happening, but we need to think about the numbers. This is why it's so frightening. There are now 2 million people in these camps. 500,000 children are now being institutionalized in orphanages, not because their parents don't exist, but they've been removed from their parents. And the Chinese ambassador, when he was on air, said they had to do all these sort of things to manage Islamist extremism in their country. But if you're managing Islamic extremism in your country, why are you stopping women from having children? the data already is out there. There's an 84% drop in birth rate in Xinjiang. If you're a woman of childbearing age, you are given a choice. I know they think the women are given a choice, but let me tell you what those choices are. You can choose to be sterilized, or you can choose to go to a camp. That may seem a choice to the Chinese authorities, but it's not a choice to the rest of the world. But the drop in the birth rate is very important, because when there was a discussion earlier on about the 10 steps of genocide, one is about controlling and diminishing the birth rate. And the Chinese government data already tells us that that is happening. Unless Rahima can correct me, I believe that Xinjiang are 1% of the Chinese population, but 80% of birth control has been provided or forced onto Uyghur women. That tells you that they are already undertaking a core principle of what is internationally recognized as genocide. But for us to have it internationally recognized as genocide, we need the United Nations and the international institutions to do the research and have the bravery to call out what is going on. And I just do not believe, Richard, that's going to happen in any real time. There's no point reflecting on this 50 years from now. So what I'm asking, I'll just pass over to Maajid just a moment, what I'm asking the UK government to do, to set up its own independent tribunal. We can work with like-minded countries, whether it's America, Australia, or the Netherlands. We can ask for evidence, we can collect the evidence, and if need be, put together an interim report on genocide. Because we cannot wait for the international institutions to get this right. Because of Chinese power, they won't.
I was just going to agree and say the UN it's not going to do it. It's not fit for purpose. The UN has been lobbied by the People's Republic of China, and a bit like the World Health Organization, a lot of the People's Republic of China own allies are in key positions in the UN, including the UN Human Rights Chair, and the candidate that China supported is now in that position. And so this might sound strange to younger ears, but those who witnessed Srebrenica and the Bosnia genocide will understand that exactly the same thing happened there. There was a paralysis in the international community, and UN peacekeepers were on guard watching as the Bosnian 8,000 Muslim men and boys were slaughtered in Srebrenica. So Ms. Ghani is correct that the international institutions are not fit for purpose, and we must act despite the fact that they may not act in time. We have to find our own ways to act.
Yes, sorry, Mia, I was going to say we have half an hour left, and I don't want this to be a Q&A. I want it to be a conversation. So absolutely, let's talk amongst ourselves now. I do want to ask Rahima one question after you've made your point.
Okay, thanks, Richard. And just a quick point, and Maajid, I think what you're doing to raise awareness on the Uyghur issue is incredible, but actually we need more of that happening. What are the challenges I think we face, and Srebrenica was the case, and what's happening in India was the geographical distance. It's too far. It's not happening here. It's not in our backyard. We can't see them. We don't know who they are. They're unfamiliar. And there's a key role, not just for governments or international institutions, but the media, to make sure this stays top of the agenda. And we share Rahima's stories and other stories, and we expose individuals to the Uyghurs and the challenges they're facing.
Rahima, I would like to bring you in. Journalists are prevented from reporting freely in Xinjiang. Footage from trains that we saw that's now leading the conversation was taken, if I'm right, two years ago. How do we establish what is taking place now? What took place last week? What will take place tomorrow, when there are so many mechanisms in place to prevent that information coming out?
It is almost impossible to get correct information. But the only information I know, new information that is coming out through those TikTok, young, very, young Uyghur people, and these teenagers even, they are very good at using this new technology, and while they're just singing or having fun, and then they have some image, some footage, and empty streets, and that just shown on the social media. For example, about 5 days ago, someone just sent me privately a short video, a statue talking. Say, oh my goodness, I just had a nap. And then when I woke up, they placed 2 large locks on the gate. They said, you are not allowed to live. Let's just become statues. And then after that, I know all these little videos or messages, it has a meaning. It's hidden meaning. Automatically, we can interpret what that meant. I just thought, oh, lockdown. Maybe they just locked down again. Straight after I read the news saying that all the flights were cancelled, they said I found coronavirus in Urumqi and Kashgar. So also in March, for example, during the height of the lockdown, and there were videos, a lot of young, mainly male, wearing the same uniform. Thousands were waiting outside the train stations or bus stations. And then the song about in Chinese called "Up New Zhejian," but it is actually the film from Yugoslavia. One of the film I'm very familiar. It's a "Goodbye, My Friend." Have that film background music of that film, and they were transported, and all were wearing masks. And then we know that they were transporting these Uyghur youth into mainland China. Then when we sourced the Chinese own announcements, actually bragging that, for this elevating poverty program, lifting the Uyghur people from a poor area, they are sending these young people to find a job in the actually state is found a job for them. So that is how they tell the story, and believing that we will buy those stories, but we know the truth.
Yeah. I mean, what's the end game here for China? They are engaged currently in a social engineering project. What is success for them? That the current generations of Uyghur Muslims are the lost, and that subsequent generations will just be identifiable as Chinese? Is that their end game, Rahima?
Historically, the Chinese, even like previous governments, or they cannot tolerate difference. They believe that they are the super race, so everyone should be the same. Even when I was in university, Chinese often asked me, you're so intelligent, how come you still believe in God? Because they feel that intelligent people shouldn't believe in God. So just believing something, they treat you like you are like a fool. Here, because throughout Chinese history, so many races disappeared. Even Manchus, who ruled China for 200 years. Now you don't see Manchu people who speak Manchu, their own language. The China's, especially CCP, after they came to power, they found 2 regions that people were most difficult to assimilate. One is Tibetans, and one other the Uyghurs, because we have very, very unique, strong culture, and we have our own language. And for Uyghurs, we are Muslims. So it's very difficult to, normally using sort of encouraging intermarriages, etc. So here they want to change this the Uyghur nation into Han, and that they consider the religion is the barrier. Is a barrier. So they use propaganda to really make the general Chinese population believe that all the Muslims are violent, they are terrorists, the Uyghurs are backward, they are dirty people, and they need to be, civilized. And that is the propaganda. They openly, in their own documents, say we are. The Uyghurs needs ideological healing because they have this disease, ideological disease. So all this disease has to be removed.
Nusrat, I'd just like to bring you in. Before we started, you mentioned that you had a meeting with US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo this week, and you were impressed with the work that the US government, not a sentence I say very often, is doing in this area. What are they doing in terms of being prime movers that we need to be doing?
Look, credit where credit is due. Pompeo was very impressive. They've identified the 4 main officials overseeing this brutality in Xinjiang, and I've put them on the Magnitsky sanctions. They've done it before us in the UK, and I hope that we can either have sight of that evidence, or I will continue to push the Foreign Office and ask why the evidence isn't heavy enough for us to do the same sanctions as the Americans. That's one thing that they've done. The second thing is that they are working with firms, American firms, and if they can identify that they are sourcing from Xinjiang, they're asking them to work out where else they can source their base products from. So this conversation is already happening on a governmental level, which is a sort of conversation that we want to have, and the reason why Maajid was outside Nike today. And also the conversation with Pompeo was interesting because, as Rahima said, we are going to have to somehow work out a productive relationship with China. But they don't believe in diversity. They don't believe in diversity of their society, diversity of politics, diversity of religion. So that just clashes with everything that we stand for in the West, which is the freedom of thought, the freedom of speech, the freedom of movement, the freedom of faith. So we're going to have to work out how we can try and bring them to understand that this isn't going to work with us in the West. And there is something that has happened that's interesting. Up to a couple of years ago, Rahima might remember, it might be 2018, I might be wrong. They were publicly putting on Chinese websites, we have 180 camps, we have X amount of people. They were publicly putting these images at the camp or the satellite images and the number out there. But then once they realized how this was not acceptable in the rest of the world, that information disappeared. I'm hoping they will begin to understand that actually it's not acceptable actually having them running as well, as in functioning, because we will be looking at our supply chains. We will be talking about issues about human rights, and they'll have to face it time and time again. If the Chinese ambassador found that 15-minute interview difficult, they're going to have to spend every hour of every day asking questions because we aren't going to stop. We've been campaigning on this for so long. It feels that we really do have a moment, and we need to just now keep going forward on this.
Country that feels entitled to behave in the way it's currently doing. What prospects for change are there from a country that's willing to behave in the way it's currently proceeding? That's a question for anyone, any of the panel.
On the issue of what success looks like as well for the PRC, I'd combine that with this question and say that where you have a nation that through the Belt and Road Initiative has heavily invested in most of the key infrastructure and ports of in developing countries around the world, in over 40 countries, where there has been a level of economic dependency not seen, in my opinion, since the British Raj with the East India Company that went in financially before it went in militarily. That's the stage I believe the PRC is at. I call it the pre-colonial stage. And so success for them is if the rest of us in the world do nothing at this critical juncture. So morally, economically, morally, if we allow this genocide to go unchecked, that's success for the PRC, because that means they've shifted the Overton window and they've redefined morality from 2020 onwards. And that will be success for them because they redefine morality in their vein. And they've made us abandon the very values that make our society so strong and vibrant. So that would be success for them if we don't do anything. success for them economically as well through the Belt and Road Initiative. In particular, in Africa, if you look at population trends and demographics, Nigeria is going to be a huge populous nation in the next 50 to 100 years, and the PRC's population is going to halve because the consequences of their one-child policy will finally kick in, and the population will halve. India will overtake China. So to maintain the level of economic activity that the PRC is currently at, and to remain the richest in the world, they're currently forecast to overtake the United States of America again in the next 50 years, but then they'll drop behind again once their population halves. To maintain that, it would be natural for a pre-colonial power to do exactly what happened with the East India Company and the British Raj, to invade, to maintain the ability to turn other countries' populations into labor as well. That's how slavery begins. That's how colonialism began. And so for the PRC, enslaved labor will become a necessity as their population drops. And so we all, the rest of the world, has to understand these dynamics, because it helps us understand what we need to do next. We need to look at Belt and Road. Of course, we're talking about the genocide right now. We need to look at the continent of Africa and what's happening there. And I'll tell you right now, there's going to be a lot of conflict there now as well going forward with not just Nigeria and Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab in Somalia, but a lot of Islamist and jihadi terror in the continent of Africa will be a consequence of this problem we're discussing now. Because of course, the military economic alliance that the PRC has just finalized with the Iranian theocracy for the next 25 years. Now we know that the so-called Islamic Republic of Iran is funding terrorism around the world through Hezbollah and what they did in Syria as well. So this will have a destabilizing effect in Africa and in the Middle East too. And so these are all successes for the PRC. But if we can understand what their game is, then that helps us at least, understand what we need to start talking about doing next as well.
Can I just come in on that as well, Richard? The 9th stage of genocide, widespread annihilation, is never inevitable. There are always opportunities to pull back and to change the course of what is underway. And we've seen such a strength of feeling. So the point I'd want to make is that we need to maintain that. I've seen some of the comments coming in from people watching now asking about action, what we can do. There's a huge strength of feeling at the moment with the images and the videos and that recent interview. One thing that I think is incumbent on all of us here who have so much goodwill towards this issue is not to lose that. There's so many opportunities and so much pressure on people today to move on to the next thing, and particularly with the news agenda, to move on to the next thing and move on to the next thing. Holocaust Memorial Day in January is only 5 or 6 months away, and that's the time when we all come together to learn from the past and see where this kind of identity-based hostility and persecution ultimately leads. I'd really encourage everyone watching to come to HMD in January and check in with yourselves. What have you done? Is that another opportunity to bring this issue back to the fore if it has faded from the news pages and from the websites? Come back to it, look to making that better future. And just very quickly, because I know there are a lot of other points and comments people want to make, one note of caution. We've already seen during the pandemic hostility based on people simply because they are Chinese, with accusations of causing the pandemic and so on. Those kind of age-old tropes are being reworked for anti-Semitic purposes. They're being used to identify other minorities. We mustn't let this issue move us into a direction where we're not also challenging where we see that kind of identity-based hostility towards innocent Chinese people too.
Just wanted to add, and on the back of Olivia's words, the UK prides itself with the Magna Carta as being the starting point for what we call today this set of moral principles that guide how we treat each other. Treatment of the Uyghurs, and based on that recognition, treatment of the Uyghurs should inform the UK's China policy. And I think it's down to each one of us to challenge government, to challenge our MPs, to ensure that any future trade or defense or manufacturing policies and agreements with China include accountability measures. And I would argue that it's more important, for example, than whether TikTok is a cyber security threat or not. René Cassin, in the last year and a half, has provided a multitude of avenues of action. There are templates, there are briefing. We challenge everyone to inform themselves on what's happening to the Uyghurs, hear stories like Rahima's stories and other survivors and other Uyghurs in the diaspora, and take action.
You touched on it briefly, the human cost. I mean, I've done some research and I've read about these kindergartens where children are basically kept permanently because their parents are under lock and key. Could you give us a sense of the societal damage that's being done? Little boys and girls growing up without their parents, entire communities just desolate. I read a report about someone who went during Ramadan and the call to prayer was not heard and no mosques were open. It's like a ghost town now. Could you give us a bit more information about that?
So is it for me? Sorry. Is that question for me? Yeah. Okay. I cannot imagine how people are actually coping, you know, every day-to-day life. Because I have a son, I know what it is like, you know, not knowing what happened to him. I cannot imagine. So yesterday when I was in Twitter, I said, how they coping? People actually asked me how they coping. So people actually, a lot, they're suicidal. They don't want to live that life because it's just too hard, too difficult. Some parents lost 5 children at once, and they are not allowed to see them. They don't know what happened to these children. And this documentary, the Undercover China's Digital Gulag, there was an undercover Chinese filmmaker went to film in Urumqi and Kashgar in the Uyghur region. And when he spoke to one Chinese official in a bar, and the official, of course, he didn't know this, he is undercover because he's Chinese. So he said, look, we need a lot of mental hospitals because if these people are, when they release, they need to be sent to mental hospital. This is the Chinese own official saying. So of course they completely a way of life in every way. The people you know, are controlled, and so it is very difficult for me to imagine, you know, what is going through their head and how they coping life, whether they are inside a camp or outside a camp. Because one of the high-tech intellectual who was detained for 3 months in the camp, and he said, you know, people even outside, they're living in a hell because they often fear all the time. They fear that maybe, you know, they are the next. So that kind of terror, fear is driving people crazy.
We're almost out of time, but I would like to just go around once more to everybody, and if they could just keep your responses as concise as possible, 30 seconds or so. I'd like to ask each of you just one question. What more can our audience do? What more can we each do to put the pressure on? One small thing that mounted up could hopefully equal some real pressure that can be brought to bear. Maybe Mia can start with that question just to end this evening's conversation.
Thank you, Richard. Don't be silent. Be an ally. I mean, there are a lot of practical actions, but I think one of the most important ones is not to be silent, to be an ally to the Uyghur people, to stand in solidarity, and then take some concrete actions to show that allyship. If it's writing and challenging the UK government to take a position, challenging businesses. China's about to host the 2022 Winter Olympics. Voice your concern around that. Yeah, so it's mainly about the solidarity and allyship.
Thanks for your contribution this evening. Olivia?
Thank you. I'd echo what Mia said. I'd also say work together, show cooperation, look for moral leadership on this, mark HMD in January and make sure the issue hasn't gone away by then. And as Mia said, show solidarity and learn more. I think we can never go wrong by learning more ourselves and trying to understand the issue more and more deeply and listening to the voices of people like Rahima, and thank you Jewish News and René Cassin for giving us all that opportunity tonight.
No sound.
Richard, who do you want to speak next? Can we hear
Me?
you? Yeah, all right. Now we can hear you.
Rat.
Okay, I'll go. That's great. Look, I think we really want people that are watching this evening to accept what we are telling them. I know it sounds extraordinary. I know it sounds like a horror movie, but this is what's happening in Xinjiang. Just do not deny what is going on. So retweet, write an article, share a conversation, mention the word Uyghur amongst your friendship group. MPs are doing a tremendous amount of work, but they're under huge pressure to deliver on a number of things. So write to your MP. This isn't happening. Well, this isn't so far removed from us because, as Maajid mentioned earlier on, the Uyghur are not only being abused, but they're also being exploited. And their products are in the market here in the UK. And once those companies their names are out there in the public domain, ask why they are buying items from slave camps in Xinjiang and go and put your money somewhere else.
So if everyone can hear me, I'm just going to give some very simple, practical advice. Everyone's got one of these. That guy there is the first guy that came to join me today when I sat outside Nike from 2 o'clock till 6 p.m. and then came here to do this. He joined me. When he joined me, a third guy came. So one person became 3 people within the space of 3 hours. Now I've got to move homes. So I promised my wife I'm not going to go and sit anywhere again because I've got to help her move. So we're going to move homes for a month. I'll be back mid-August. But until mid-August, everyone watching, there's 1,000 people watching this. Everyone watching can also get their phone and get one friend and sit outside a Nike store. Start with Nike, please. Don't go to Adidas or Gap. They're also culprits, but we have to be focused. If we start with Nike, if Nike caves, the rest will cave anyway, because Nike makes a big fancy hoo-ha about being all social justice, and they're using enslaved labor. So get your friends, sit outside Nike, get your phone, broadcast it on Facebook Live or any other platform so that everyone can watch it, and some chap like that you've never met before come and join you, and then suddenly become 3 people. If that happens in every Nike store in every town, very soon the message will get through. If Nike caves, I promise you all the others will go as well. So that's a very practical thing to do. If there's 6 of us here but 1,000 people watching, we haven't even left our homes, right? So you can amplify your voice with this little thing today. It's magic. And you just tag Nike and Nike gets embarrassed. And so I advise everybody just to actually do something, act, because it's quite easy. You can get a bottle of water and it's maximum impact. It really does embarrass the organization or company that you're sitting outside of, in this case, Nike. And I really don't feel like I need to prove that because everyone saw what happened last week with the petition. So it is actually effective. So I ask everybody to do that, and I'll be back in a month to do it as well.
And the last word to Rahima, one thing that you'd like people watching this evening to take away from the conversation.
I would like them to follow me on Twitter. Visit World Uyghur Congress website. We have campaigns, every month or every other month. We focus on different campaigns. So I want people to support my campaign in the UK. Call to action is it's launched today with over 180 organizations supporting. So this we need a global support. So every action counts. Be compassionate, and just even offer prayers can help. Thank you.
So our time is up. All that remains for me to say is thank you to our esteemed panel, Rahima, Maajid, Nusrat, Olivia and Mia. I hope that you found this discussion has moved you to find out more about the issue and to help support Rahima and her fellow Uyghurs in exile. Thank you to Justin Cohen for organising this evening's event, to Leo Mindell and Andy Shaw for producing. Keep an eye out for more Jewish news, social media and online events. But for now,
on a front page, so thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you, Maajid. Yes, last week it was one of the very few non-Jewish stories we've ever put on the front page, and also generated quite a lot of feedback, which was very gratifying. So thank you for that, Maajid. Yes, you've interrupted my final farewell, which is all I was going to say. Really, is good night, God bless, and sleep well.
Thank you, Richard.